I'm Rob.
And I'm Nate.
And welcome back to Rob and Nate Record a Podcast. This is week 3 of our Keira Knightley theme month.
And we will be watching the Academy Award-winning motion picture, The Duchess. And there's a reason why I call it the Academy Award-winning motion picture, The Duchess. It has to do with the fact that it is an Academy Award-winning movie. It was nominated for 1 Oscar and won in its one category, which is costume design. So skip to the end on that one. But I watched the Oscar telecast, this would have been in 2009 for the 2008 awards, with Joe Miyasato, who you've met, and my friend Steve Jacob and various other Jacobs. And for some reason it became an in-joke with us. And I don't know why. I've never seen this movie before, but the movie came up a lot. And the joke was to always refer to it by the extended title of the Academy Award-winning movie, The Duchess.
Yeah.
But that's too long for this podcast. So I will simply refer to the Academy Award-winning movie, The Duchess, as The Duchess.
Okay. By the way, it was nominated for 2.
Oh, for 2.
Yeah, it also had a nomination for art direction.
Art direction, okay. Well,
Yeah.
it won the one.
It won the 1. It was nominated for a 2nd, so. How much did you know about this movie coming into tonight?
I knew enough about it that I was a little concerned last week when we watched Colette about whether they'd be too similar. And I had toyed in my mind with maybe we should watch The Imitation Game. Because I definitely wanted to see this because I have it on DVD, but I'd never seen it. And I largely bought it because of the in-joke. But I was interested in seeing it, and I'm ultimately glad I did.
I'm also glad I saw it, though I'm not sure how frequently I would revisit this movie.
It's an interesting companion piece. It's kind of the flip side of last week's movie, Colette.
Kind of. Though it has certain tonal similarities in terms of independence and things of that nature. But would you describe this as a happy movie?
I don't. It's kind of a melancholy movie.
Yeah. I would
Should we do a brief synopsis of what this movie is about?
Yes. The Duchess is a chronicle of the life of 18th century aristocrat Georgina, Duchess of Devonshire, who was reviled for her extravagant political and personal life.
And also somewhat celebrated for at least some of those things. Devonshire is, of course, another term for Devon, which is a province in the southwest of England. It is right next to Cornwall, which is a little peninsula that juts out furthest into the Atlantic. And it is an area I know for To Serve Them All My Days, which was R.F. Dilderfield novel, and it was turned into a miniseries in right around 1980, which is one of my favorite miniseries of all time. So I have a certain affection for the area, or at least I knew, what the area was.
Yeah. And this movie, the cast of this movie, we have obviously Keira Knightley as the star, and the predominant person on screen throughout this entire movie. Keira Knightley is Georgina, who is the Duchess. Ralph Fiennes.
Ray Fiennes. It's spelled Ralph, but it's pronounced Ray.
Ray Fiennes is the Duke. Dominic Cooper is Charles Grey. Charlotte Rampling is Lady Spencer. Haley Atwell is Bess Foster, or Miss Lady Elizabeth Foster. Simon McBurney is Charles Fox. John Shrapnel is General Grey. I'm not sure we really need to go into much else on this.
Those are our central players and then some. This is, I guess this is one we should probably talk over more or less chronologically, right? Because there's a lot that happens with it. The opening sequence is basically an arranged marriage. Georgina's mother, the Lady Spencer, negotiates her marriage to the Duke of Devonshire, Ray Fiennes. And basically, Ray Fiennes just wants an heir.
He wants really basically a guarantee of an heir.
Yeah. And so she talks up the family. Well, we never have trouble having kids in our family. You're going to get a safe bet.
And they've always had boys at some point.
Yeah.
You're not going to have any trouble obtaining an heir.
That they do. So they have the wedding. He's cold. He's kind of distant. He's not unpleasant necessarily, but...
Well, I think it's interesting and worth noting just how, like at that early stage, how Georgina is kind of infatuated. And she even asks her mother, like, does he love me?
Yeah. The whole idea, because her mother makes this reference, like, I thought I would keep you with me until 18 at least, but with a match like this.
Yeah.
So she's 16, 17 years old at the time this marriage happens. She's naive.
Yeah.
And expects more out of him, and later says to her mother, I thought he'd be like Papa, very reserved on the outside, but when you got to know him, you'd see that there's some depth there.
And that we'd have conversations.
We'd have conversations, but he doesn't talk to me. He's not interested. He's interested in one thing, which is the process of producing the heir, which he does in a manner that is not of particular pleasure to her. And eventually she does get pregnant, and it's a girl.
And he's very excited for her pregnancy.
Yeah. She goes into labor at a public
party.
event. Again, they're gambling, I think. That's one of her talents. And then when she goes into labor,
he doesn't even wait for her to leave the room.
My wife is in labor. I think this calls for a toast.
Before she's even left the room.
I think I shall have an heir by the end of the night.
Yeah. But alas, she has a girl. We then flash forward to 6 years later, where she has had a second girl, and it's the second girl at this point is at least 2.
Yeah. And then there's the third/first, which isn't really hers. It's the Duke's child by a maid that died.
Yeah.
And that was brought into the household after her death. And the Duke's like, she'll be of no trouble to you, or in fact, she may do you some good. You can practice your mothering on her.
You can practice on her until you produce an heir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she will go on to say, I love her like she's my own.
Yeah, she takes her in as though she
really
was
takes
her
her
own
in.
daughter.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
If anything, they have a special bond.
Yep. And she is present throughout the rest of the movie.
And they have certain social obligations. They also have political obligations. The Duke is kind of in the sphere of the Whig Party, which is basically the left-of-center political party at that time. The Tories being the right-wing party. And there's that scene at the earlier in the film where they're having that dinner party, and the Lord Fox of the Parliament gives this long speech, and afterwards somebody else is going to give a speech, and the Duke just walks out, and everybody stands and then sits down, and the just stands up. I got to see what's going on. Goes and says, "Is everything fine? Are you okay? Do you want me to come with you?" And he says, "I have no problem with the politics. It's the rhetoric that I can't stand."
Yeah.
It's like, I was done eating, and so I left. These speeches bore me. And so when she comes back, and Lord Fox is like, is he all right? He's like, I hope it was my speech did not tire him. So no. In fact, he said he enjoyed it immensely and expressed the hope that the next time it would be even longer.
Yeah. Well, and she has developed quite a friendship with Mr. Fox, which persists throughout the movie, in part because Mr. Fox's future protege is
Charles
Gray. Yeah, I blanked on his name for a second.
Played by Dominic Cooper, which is another parallel to last week's film, because this film, we got ourselves the Dominic Cooper as the aspired for loved one, and last week we had Dominic West as the husband of dubious status, who she outgrows.
But Charles Gray, if you remember, was also present at the beginning of the movie when she's out playing in the yard. He's one of her childhood friends.
They're having a fake race. They're having a race where they bet on these young men as though they're horses to make this round, and she's bet on him, and he does win. But she is taken away. Your mother needs to see you before they can
decide on what he owes her.
Well, yes.
Or she owes
so you
him
owe
for
me
her fortune.
something, but what's that going to be?
But he's apparently maintained an infatuation with her since that time. So at one of these parties...
It's actually a premiere of a play called School for Scoundrel by an author named Sheridan that is apparently loosely based on the Duke.
Yeah.
And as they're watching the play, Duke is picking up on this, and he ain't liking his portrayal on stage.
Well, but before that, she encounters Lady Foster in the park one day.
No, they meet at the premiere. I'm pretty sure.
No, they met in the park.
They meet at the park after. So they first meet at the premiere, and then later they stumble upon each other in the park. She's in the box, and then they meet in the social gathering afterwards.
Well, she was in the box because they'd already become friends.
No, so she's in a different box on kind of the other side, and then they have the post-party thing, and then Ray Fiennes is hitting on her, and so...
Oh, I thought he hit on her at one of the gambling things. Because he asked her to dance.
Okay, that may be.
Asked Lady Foster to dance, or he sees... let me rephrase that. Georgina sees him ask Bess to dance and goes over and asks what he asked her, and she tells it that he asked her to dance, and then they start to develop a friendship. She says she'd like to meet her later. Then they do meet at the park.
Do meet at the park, yeah.
And so when they go to the premiere of the play, Lady Foster is in their box with them because remember the artist is drawing the sketch of the three of them in the box.
That's true.
Yeah.
And what was the alternate title of that play?
I don't remember.
So I was going to call it The Bad Marriage.
Yeah. But so she develops this friendship with Lady Foster and then soon discovers that the friendship between Lady Foster and the Duke is more than a friendship.
Yeah. Well, I was wondering for a little while whether the friendship between Lady Foster and the Duchess was more than a friendship. It started to border on Colette territory for...
It was a very close friendship for a while until she discovered that the Duke also had a similar friendship.
Because they move her into their place because she doesn't have a place to stay because her husband has basically disowned her and taken the 3 boys she has, and she doesn't think she's ever going to see him again. But it later turns out that part of the reason for the affair that Lady Foster has with the Duke is he promises to get her boys back, and he does, and he's glad to have them around the house because, man, that man wants an heir. He wants boys.
Yeah.
Like his closest companions are those 2 hunting dogs.
Yeah.
Like he's just not interested in the girly stuff, the ladies. Just give me a man that I can go hunting with and be a boring Gus with. But this not to say he dislikes the ladies, because he very much likes the ladies because he has children by more than one.
Yeah.
And then this relationship with Bess turns into a rather unconventional domestic situation.
Yeah. With her, I mean, even at the breakfast table with them, all this stuff. Obviously, Georgina objects to a certain extent or takes it as giving her leave to have her own affair. And so she eventually meets up with Charles Grey. And at first they're discreet, but they don't remain discreet. And at one point, Georgina decides to go to Bath without the kids, without the family, ahead of everyone else.
Bath being a resort town that they frequent.
Yeah. And they apparently are not being discreet in Bath. So the Duke steps in before things can get out of hand or become too public and basically tells her, well, before this happens, she has produced the heir. He, one night after a confrontation about Bess, he follows her and forces himself upon Georgina in a, I think it's safe to refer to as a grotesque manner.
Yeah.
It does result in an heir, but that gives Georgina a license, she believes, to pursue her own affair. So she meets Charles Grey in Bath. They have a tryst there for a while, and then the Duke intervenes and tells her, basically, you either have to pick him and give up everything, including your children.
And actually brings her mother with her as because he's figured out what's going on. So brings the mother there as leverage to try to convince the Duchess to break off with
Charles Grey.
And they have this conversation between the 3 of them. And she says, but yes, he loves me, referring to Charles Grey. And her mother says, and so does William. And the droll line delivery from Ray Fiennes, yes, I love you. We both laughed out loud.
Yeah. I mean, I do believe on some level that he loved her, but not in a conventional manner.
Well, they do have
or he wanted to love her, but the way that eventually he comes to realize that the way that he's treated her has made it difficult for any love to foster.
And he has that conversation with her, I think, shortly after the birth of the heir, where he says, Georgina, I too abhor this whole thing. That he doesn't want to put her through this, but he feels obligated to get this male heir.
That's when he delivers her the check for having produced the heir.
Yeah. The unspecified reward he said that she'd get.
But yeah, so Georgina, of course, well, she sleeps on it. She sends him away and says, that's fine, I'm choosing Charles Grey. She doesn't even make it through the night and then realizes the error of her ways, rushes back to London. Eventually does break things off with Charles Grey, then shows up at a public event just thoroughly intoxicated. And when they take her back out and there's a private confrontation with her and Bess and the Duke, she tells the Duke that she's pregnant with Charles Grey's child. So she's sent away to the country. And in the moment that starts to redeem Miss Lady Elizabeth Foster, she insists on going with Georgina to the country home until she can give birth to Charles Grey's daughter. The Duke objects, and Bess Foster, insists and
There's
goes
nothing
with her.
you can say that can stop me.
Yeah, and goes with her. An arrangement's been made for the infant to be turned over to the Grey family, and our general, John Shrapnel, our General Grey, meets them for the exchange, and then Georgina returns home.
Yeah. Eliza is raised as a cousin.
A niece.
A niece. And after Georgina has gone home, she's been out of circulation for a while. There are certain rumors floating about. And so the Duke says, that so-and-so is having this party for your return from your extended vacation. I think we really need to go. Everybody's going to be there. We need to put up a united front. And that does give her an opportunity to have a brief reconnect with Charles Grey, who tells her, they kind of talk in that stilted way to say things without actually saying them. I have a niece now, and her name is Eliza, and she is very loved. And then it kind of goes back and shows that basically the Duke of Devonshire is a functional polygamist until the death of Georgina, after which he marries Lady Foster, as they talk about in a pretty intriguing, what's the word I'm looking for, where they put things on the screen about what happens later.
Yeah.
Those were really interesting.
Kind of an epilogue.
An epilogue, I'd like to look into in more detail kind of what happened to some of these characters.
You kind of wonder at what age Georgina died, because, I mean, Ray Fiennes as the Duke is significantly older than Georgina when they marry. In fact, at the beginning, there's that moment where you said he needed to go to see the obstetrician, but when they show his view of the yard, it seems like he's got cataracts.
I thought that too, but later on, when she's looking, there's a scene where the Duchess is looking out and it has a similar effect, and I'm not positive if that was meant to communicate some kind of degenerative condition that both of them ended up having, or probably more likely it's just an effect of the way the windows were.
Well, but regardless, he's significantly older than she is.
Yeah.
So at what age did she die that he's able to...
Still...
That he, number one, he outlived her. Number two, he remarries, and has an interest in remarrying, and the things of that nature. It leaves you with a few questions. It does tell us in the epilogue that she secretly visited Eliza on a regular basis, and eventually Eliza named her own daughter Georgina
after her.
Yeah.
This was really interesting to see as a companion piece to Colette. These stories are separated by roughly 130 years, and in the Duchess is about compromise, and she doesn't really get what she wants, whereas in Colette, she does.
In the end,
she's able to break free. It's at that point she was able to break free of the social constraints in the early 20th century, but in the late 18th century, especially for a woman of position, that was not a doable thing.
Yeah.
So again, the costuming is a great looking film. The costuming's great. The sets, the locations, some of these beautiful houses, period houses. Some of the lighting's great. They do a lot of interesting stuff with candles.
Yeah.
I actually found myself kind of liking the score. Still kind of running in the background of my head. It might be one.
Is that why you let it play through the credits?
Yeah. It might be one that I find online and listen to a little bit more. Yeah. Something. I really didn't know that much about it. My impression actually was, and there's a little bit of this at the beginning of the film where they talk about her designing. There's going to be more about her becoming like a fashion designer.
Well,
which again is touched on.
At one point they referred to her as the Empress of Fashion.
That's true. So she does become a fashion designer, but that's really just kind of a side thing that happens in the film. It's not the focus.
No, not at all. It's only briefly touched on, and it's more through implication than anything direct.
Yeah. She'll wear something, and then people will copy it, basically.
I think the most direct thing that she said is that one public event they're at, and she says, I know people are going to ask about the feathers in my hat. I'm only aware of two specimens of it ever being there. One is on my hat, and the other one
is seeking office in the Tory party.
Yeah.
So she does become, long before women could vote, long before most men could vote, a celebrity campaign spokeswoman.
Well, and she is engaging in conversations with Mr. Fox about those types of topics. Like he's talking about freedom, and she says, well, how far does your freedom extend? And he says, how did he phrase it? Freedom and moderation.
Yeah.
And she says, well, you can't have one without the other. You know, she says you can't be moderately dead.
Yeah.
You know, you can't have moderate
Would you
freedom.
have everyone have every man the right to vote? Well, not every man, but more men.
Yeah.
More men than currently have it.
Freedom and moderation. Yeah. It was interesting. You can see some parallels to modern things, or at least things through the mid 20th century.
At that one particular rally, how everyone was wearing blue, and you had the celebrity spokesperson, and they're going to crush the glass ceiling, and we're going to yes, we can it. And I couldn't help but think of democratic politics of the early 21st century.
Yeah. What other thoughts do you have on this movie? I think the performances are great. Keira Knightley is pretty consistent throughout it.
Here's a question.
I think Hayley Atwell was more subtle, though.
She was more subtle, yeah. And this was fairly early for her. And also for Miss Knightley, it had only been around 22 at the time this movie came out.
Yeah.
I liked Ralph Fiennes. I liked his dryness.
I liked him to a certain extent, but his character is not intended to be liked.
He's not intended to be liked. And I kind of liked the husband in the last film. Both of these characters to an extent. Like, they weren't irredeemable. I didn't hate them.
Yeah.
They were something intriguing about them. And that runs to the question of which was the worst husband.
I would say the Duke was, right, in this movie.
Yeah.
He was the worst husband.
Because the husband in Colette, there are times in which he would have been fun. He was often fun.
He also accepted her whims and never forced himself on her.
This guy was less, in certain ways, like, he was reactive as opposed to proactive in his awfulness. So when he did something awful, it was a response to something. Whereas the other husband just kind of did something awful for no good reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know how this movie fared in the box office?
Let's find out.
This had an estimated budget of 13.5 million euros. It had a domestic opening weekend of just $190,000. In the U.S. and Canada, it grossed just under 14 million, and its worldwide gross was 43 million.
So this came out in 2008. The one time I traveled to the UK in 2012, the exchange rate was about €1 was worth about $1.50. So if it made 43.3 million off of 13.5 million, so that would be roughly $20 million budget, something like that.
Yeah.
And then it made a little more than twice that.
Yeah.
It's decent, especially for a film that is kind of niche. And, those costumes wouldn't have come cheap.
Oh, no. No, some of those costumes would have been really expensive.
The critical reaction to this film was kind of mixed.
Yep.
Garnering a Rotten Tomatoes score of 62% and audience score of 67%.
Yeah, and it has an aggregate score on IMDb of 6.9 stars. So not super well received, which I guess leads to, how would you rate this film?
I liked it. I'd give it 3 stars, and I think I'd give it a 7, maybe an 8 on the 10-star scale.
We're close on the 10-star scale, a little bit further apart on the 4-star scale. I think I'd only give it 2. This is one that is borderline on that 2.5. If and when I give half stars, but I don't think it quite raises to a 3-star level for me. And I'm kind of between a 6 and a 7 on the 10-star scale.
So I liked it a little more than you.
Yeah. Again, I'm glad I saw it. It's one that I was aware of. Had some interest in seeing. I'm glad that I did see it. Again, I don't know that I would describe this as a happy film. So again, I'm not sure how frequently I'd revisit it. There's not a lot about her life that was super pleasant and happy for her outside of that short period when she had the daughters before more pressure came back for the heir.
Yeah.
Things of that nature. And we also learned that in that time she had several other pregnancies that
2
didn't
male
end well.
stillbirths.
Yeah. So, I mean, it never was exactly a particularly happy time for her in her life. You know, she never, from the time that she got married on, it was, fits and spurts and things.
It would almost be interesting to see something. I guess you'd probably have to do this. I could see the BBC doing it as like a mini-series. But those later years, I think, would be interesting to see how they made it work. Because according to the little text at the end, they did. And they even said that when she died and the Duke remarried, it was with she had given her blessing to it ahead of time. It's like, when I die, go ahead and marry.
Yeah. Well, and their children were clearly friends, and Bess was friendly with their children and things of that nature. So, yeah. Any other thoughts on this?
I think we've said what we have to say.
Okay, I'm Rob.
I'm Nate.
This is Rob and Nate Record a Podcast.
I would say, though, between this and Colette, and she did a version of Anna Karenina, she made a justified adultery trilogy.
What's the other one that's... There's another one that you could throw into that might be... I don't know. I'm blanking on the name of it. The one with Sigmund Freud.
Oh, I've seen that. A Dangerous Method.
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
Not yet. It's on my list.
Different.
Come on, we gotta have a good outtake at some point. Actually, I guess we don't have to have a good outtake.
No. I was hoping that the adultery trilogy would be a sufficient outtake, but I don't.
You know what? Adultery trilogy is... yeah.
The justifiable
I figured you would
adultery
want
trilogy.
the adultery trilogy removed.
What's the word I'm looking for?
Trying to think through what else I want to say. The thoughts are not formulating yet.
Mm-hmm.
Now I don't know what to talk about.
Indeed.
Yeah. Which will also not make the outtakes.
Yes.
But I think our levels are fine.
Indeed.
Okay, you ready? That would be a no.
I suppose I'm a go. But you're not yet.